Alrighty, welcome everybody to part one of the Building Resilience webinar series with our partners at Mindwise Innovation. My name is Kate Bergstrom and I am the Senior Associate Commissioner here at the League and really thrilled to be kicking us off today and introducing today's session. Today is part one of a two-part series that is built specifically for coaches, administrators, and staff to further develop skills and understanding around mental health and behavioral health. The conference is making a concerted effort to provide our coaches and staff with more resources amidst the challenging time we're all in, not only to take care of your team, your department, your staff, but also to take care of yourselves. And what we've been using as sort of a metaphor for this two-part series is that when you're thinking about being on an airplane, which I know many of us have not done in a long while, you're much better off when you've put your own oxygen mask on first before you proceed to helping others. We could not have done this on our own, and we are very, very lucky to bring in two individuals from the Mindwise team to lead our conversation. Mindwise Innovations, based in the Boston area, offers a comprehensive approach to mental health, substance abuse, and suicide prevention. Utilizing their suite of digital and consultative services, they support early intervention, education, and crisis management to promote improved health outcomes and help shape the future of behavioral health care. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our two experts who we have with us here today, and then we'll jump into housekeeping and then get going. So first we have Lisa Desai. Lisa is the Director of Behavioral Health Consulting at Mindwise Innovation, a division of the Riverside Community Care. Dr. Desai has had over 20 years of clinical and administrative experience across delivery systems in college counseling centers, community mental health, hospitals, and private practice. In her role at Mindwise, Dr. Desai leads the development and implementation of behavioral health programs for the workplace and communities with the goal of reaching at-risk and underserved populations. Dr. Desai also oversees Mindwise behavioral health screening platform and regularly consults with partners across various sectors. Dr. Desai is committed to understanding and addressing cultural context, which impacts mental health. I have personally had the pleasure of working with Lisa in action and seeing her on other student athlete centric mental health panels, and I'm really thrilled to have her here with us today. And then we have Alex Pradas, who has over 10 years of experience working with youth and their families in the field of education and mental health. Alex currently serves as the program director of the Needham Community Service Agency at Riverside Community Care, which supports youth with severe emotional disturbances and their families. Alex is a member of the Riverside Trauma Center's critical incident team. In this role, she provides support and psychoeducation to groups and individuals in the aftermath of a critical incident, such as suicide loss or a natural disaster. Alex is a behavioral health trainer with Mindwise Innovations and an outpatient clinician at Tradeport Counseling and Mediation Associates based in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Alex specializes in EMDR therapy to individuals who've experienced trauma. She is committed to helping individuals and communities find healing and is very passionate about collaborating with organizations to support mental health awareness and increasing access to that support. So thanks so much for both Alex and Lisa being here today. I've had the pleasure of working with them over the past few weeks to get ready for not only part one, but part two. So really thrilled to have the two of you here with us today. I am going to do last housekeeping and then turn it over to those two. So first, please do not forget to register for part two. So this is, like I said, part one of a two-part series. And the second part is titled Self-Care is Not Selfish. So I've just dropped the link in the chat with the registration for part two, which is on April 6th, a Tuesday, also at 12 p.m. If you could, please keep yourself muted for the entirety of the session. You're more than welcome, and we certainly invite you to keep your camera on. We'd love for this to be a highly engaging session. If you prefer to keep your camera off, totally fine, but we will have everybody muted for now. We are, like I said, encouraging interaction and engagement. So we do plan to have you all utilize the chat function, and that'll be in two primary ways. The first will be, there will be points through the conversation in today's session where Lisa and Alex will ask some questions and might be looking for feedback from the audience. And in that case, we encourage you to drop things in the chat and respond to their prompts. And in doing so, you can just respond to the chat, the everyone and that'll go out to everyone, and all attendees will be able to see the message. It's always helpful, we think, in situations like this when we're talking about mental health, to see what your peers and your colleagues are also thinking and feeling, so that will make the conversation much more dynamic. The second way to use the chat function is to ask questions. So whether you want to ask questions to everybody and don't care if it's anonymous or not, just drop those into the chat. If you want to ask a question but want it to be anonymous, what you can do instead of using the everyone chat function is just chat directly to America East Conference, the username, and then we will incorporate those questions into the chat. And then lastly, I just want to mention that this session is being recorded, and we will make it available to everybody after the fact, so you can not only rewatch it, but also share it with your colleagues who may have had a conflict or missed the opportunity to be here today. So with that, I am going to get quiet and do some listening and learning, and I am going to invite Alex and Lisa to take over. So thanks everyone for being here. We appreciate it.
Great, thank you so much for that introduction, Kate. That was quite something. And thank you for spearheading this. Kate really has longstanding commitment to mental health in student athletes, and I know with diversity and inclusion as well. So thank you for organizing this. Alex and I are delighted to be here. So as Kate said, we're from Mindwise Innovations. We cannot emphasize enough that we would like this to be a conversation. I know that can feel hard via Zoom. Also, when people aren't necessarily able to kind of speak, verbally, but please do use the chat function. Kate has graciously offered to monitor the chat, so she'll be letting us know when questions come through or thoughts come through that we can integrate into the discussion. So today is about how to support and bolster mental health among your student athletes, both through some techniques, strategies that we'll share with you, as well as thinking about how can you build a culture for your team on campus, within the work that you do that also supports mental health and any help seeking that they may need. The next session will be really focused on your well-being as administrators, as staff, as coaches. We also do hope that what you learned today, you very much think about how this can also apply to you in your daily lives. So with that, we're going to start with the poll question. Kate, I think is the poll up? Yeah. So if you would take just a quick second, which statement best describes your experience of your student athlete mental health during COVID? This will help us just kind of level set a little bit of where we are, what we're all experiencing. Thank you for such a great response. I can see got a lot of answers.
Give it maybe 5 more seconds and then we'll.
Yeah. So yeah, this would fit with what we're hearing, what we're noticing. Kate, does this seem to kind of fit with what 37% have noticed a dramatic increase, and 43% a moderate, and 20% a small?
Yep, it's not a surprise to me. I think it's certainly a sign of the times that we've been living in this past year.
It also lets us know that you're very much paying attention to this already. I mean, I think we're all thinking about it. And as Alex just said, hold on one second. I think I need to get the, here we go. As Alex just said, we really can't have any conversations these days about behavioral health without thinking about what we've lived through in the past year and what we're continuing to live through. Even before COVID, 50% of US adults, I think it was a 2018 national poll, indicated that they were struggling with mental health concerns, 50%. And we know that pre-COVID, anxiety and depression were increasing. Particularly anxiety was very much spiked on college campuses. Since COVID, the impact on young adults, particularly in college students, has been really dramatic. Over 50% of young adults So 18-24, right in that college, graduate school range, are experiencing increased depression, anxiety. A quarter are reporting increased alcohol or substance use, or for the first time starting in alcohol or substance use. This I find particularly striking if you look at it compared to the adult population, which is 13. That's a quarter. That's a lot of students. A lot of your athletes are going to be included in that. And then over a quarter have had serious thoughts of suicide. In addition to the pandemic, we've been faced with a national unrest around racism in our country. And so we also know there's been a differential impact on Black Americans and Asian Americans specifically. Not to say that other ethnic minority groups have not been touched by this or deeply affected. It's simply, this is a survey that's looked at those ethnic groups specifically. And I do know, I mean, I know from talking with Kate and prior conversations, many of your athletes, many students on campus are feeling very affected, not only by COVID, but very much by the national unrest. So we know that all of this is a backdrop to what you're seeing with your students. We are not sharing this to simply be kind of bringing grim news. Alex is going to talk a bit about another side of what this could mean.
Yes. So there's no question it's been a challenging year. But if there is a silver lining to all of this, it's that people are talking more about their stress and about mental health struggles. Because of the year that we've had, everyone has been impacted. And the effects of this pandemic, sure, they're certainly not evenly distributed. So I don't mean to say that, but everyone has been impacted. But a result of that is that there's more conversation about mental health and about stress. People are checking in more with each other and discussing how they're doing. It's a regular part of interacting with others these days, and talking about not only the challenges, but self-care and what we're doing to take care of ourselves. I'm sure you know that if you turn on TV or you're on social media, it doesn't take long for something related to mental health to pop up. There are lots of celebrities sort of taking this on as a focus and sort of trying to bring more visibility and less stigma to issues of mental health. And so as a result, there's this conversation emerging about mental health struggles. And we know that the more we talk about issues of mental health, the less shame people feel themselves and within their communities. With more talk, more visibility, there's more opportunities for education, right? For knowledge, for less stigma, and for people to have a better chance to seek help and to know all the supports that are available to them. So we really recognize that although it's been a very challenging year, something good that has come from this is we're talking more about mental health.
And I think that piece, Alex, what you were saying about less shame and decreased stigma is huge, because shame can be so silencing. So the fact that it is more visible, I think, has a huge impact. And one of the things that we know is that when we think about reaching out, it's important to think about it as strength. A lot of times we think of vulnerability as something that we have to overcome. That's something that's quiet. And it's really about, how do we rethink vulnerability to see it as strength? Alex, I know you had some thoughts about that.
Yes, definitely. As you had said, Lisa, being vulnerable, talking about mental health challenges, it takes courage and it takes strength. And reaching out for help is something that we should honor and respect, because it takes so much courage and strength to do that. And when we face our challenges and reach out for help and receive help, right, we become more resilient. And so what do we mean when we say resilient? Sometimes resilience is thought of as bouncing back. But do we ever really bounce back the way that we were? We're changed by the things that happen to us, right? When difficult things happen in our lives, we persevere, but we are changed by those things. And so really we want you to also consider thinking about resilience. The essence of resilience is that it's a positive, adaptive response in the face of adversity. Resilience is what allows us to transform potentially toxic stress into tolerable stress, right? And it allows us to face the next challenge that we come across. And so we know that there are many factors that contribute to resilience, including social support, a belief in recovery, both on behalf of the individual who is struggling, but also the community they're a part of, having a sense of purpose in one's life, being engaged in meaningful activities, and then of course engagement in therapy as needed and appropriate. And I do want to say too, the research is very clear on this topic that social interaction, social support is essential for strengthening resilience. There is such a clear tie between the resilience that someone has and the type of social support that they receive. So you might be wondering how do we do this, right? What does responsive social support look like within your role? And so we think of this as creating a team culture where it's okay to talk about tough topics, right? And so we want to offer two sort of constructs to help drive home this point a little bit more. So the first is that of psychological safety. And this was introduced first by Amy Edmondson, who defined psychological safety as a shared belief held by members of a team that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. Psychological safety, it's not being nice. It's about giving candid feedback. It's about openly admitting your mistakes and supporting a culture that everyone can learn from everyone else. And when psychological safety is achieved, team members know that they will not be made to feel ashamed or embarrassed or ostracized because there is a culture that is built for interpersonal risk-taking and acceptance. And we're going to talk more later in this presentation about psychological safety, but just we wanted to introduce this idea to you as one way to think about how to create that social support that is so important and so tied to the resilience of your student athletes. And the other construct, the other concept we want to talk to you about is the idea of a trauma-informed community. And what this means is that being trauma-informed is it's a mindset shift, excuse me. It's moving away from what's wrong with you to what happened to you, right? It's a shift from seeing someone's behavior as and therefore their behavior as bad or maybe a reflection on they themselves being bad or fill in the blank, and seeing more as seeing the behavior as a result of injury, right? So it's a shift away from what we're seeing and what's on the surface and being more curious about what might have happened to this person and what they have been through. And the fact is 6 out of 10 men and 50% of women have experienced trauma in their lives. And that is enough to warrant a trauma-informed approach, right? Much like we don't know who has COVID. When we leave our homes and go out into the community, right, we take these universal precautions. We wear our mask, we stay physically distant, some people wear gloves. We just assume that everyone has it for our own safety and for the safety of others. And so I want you to also think about trauma backgrounds in a similar way, right? We don't know who has been through a traumatic experience. The statistics show that most people have. And so it's imperative that we build a safe and supportive environment for everyone.
Yeah, and to echo that point, Alex, it is very much about how do we create support for everyone, because we are not here to kind of put pressure on you to diagnose folks, to become mini therapists. That's not what this is about. This is really the opposite in a sense. It's for you to have a sense of how to best respond if one of your athletes comes to you and talks about struggling. Or if you notice that there's something going on, how do you start that conversation? And then how do you then help them get to the next point, wherever that may be? We'll talk about some practical tips around that. But again, it's about a supportive environment, not just for them, but for us as well. We all need that supportive environment because from our peers to ourselves to the student athletes, we don't know people's experiences. And so very much, as Alex was talking about, that's the underpinning of both psychological safety and trauma-informed care. I would say the commonality is about relationships. It's being relational. As Alex said, it's great to be nice, and that's a component, but the effectiveness of psychological safety is really having a strong relationship. And I'll talk a bit more about how to operationalize that, if you will, in a few minutes. So I want to just kind of level set a little bit, understanding about what we mean when Alex and I are referring to behavioral health, or when you're hearing about that. Behavioral health in the kind of clinical world is thought of as an umbrella term, which includes both mental health and substance misuse. Even with substance misuse, sometimes it's called abuse, misuse, use. It's really about the way that people use substances in a way that is damaging to them, that interferes with their relationships and their life. We're going to review in a minute some most commonly occurring mental health issues, just so you have a sense of what the signs look like. One thing to really remember is that we all experience mental health. Sometimes when mental health comes up, it's talked about in the context of mental health disorders, mental health problems. And sure, that's one part of the continuum. That continuum goes from, really feeling strong and good about how we are with our mental well-being, to really struggling and to having perhaps chronic mental health problems or chronic mental illness. Most of us are on that continuum somewhere in the middle. Most of us kind of bounce around very normatively based on what's going on in our lives. That's in our relationships, in our environment, global situations that we're dealing with, job situations that we're dealing with. And as Alex said, working through those struggles is a big part of what's building resilience in all of us. A particularly tricky thing around substance use, particularly for athletes, is that it is everywhere. And for the college experience, the university experience, it's almost this rite of passage. It's something they look forward to. Part of the loss, actually, around not being able to socialize, not be able to hopefully party within limits, that's a big part of their loss. So as coaches, I can imagine it's very hard, and we'll talk about this in a minute, how to kind of determine that line of, is this normative, enjoying that college freedom, or is this crossing a line and going too far? So the main thing, one of the main takeaways of today is, how can you feel? We'd love to hear from you in this during the course of this time. How can you feel? How can we help you feel more comfortable having those conversations around mental health, so that we're talking about them in the same way that we do physical health? So just going to kind of pop up here some signs of what depression looks like and what anxiety looks like. Sorry, it came up out of order. As you can see, some of these symptoms and signs overlap. So loss of interest, difficulty concentrating, sleep issues, loss of appetite can happen with both anxiety and depression. Some people carry anxiety very much on their sleeve. You kind of can tell that they're nervous. You can just tell. Other people are very quiet with their anxiety. So it may not be visible. You may pick up on it by their worrying, by their asking, is it okay if I take time off? My leg's hurting. Am I going to get in trouble if I can't run, if I can't practice today? So those are kind of some things to look for as well. Depression is very much around, it can actually look a couple different ways. It could be the classic loss of interest, feeling sad, maybe getting tearful for no reason. It could also be agitation. People are sometimes surprised to know that actually both anxiety, particularly depression, can really show up as people getting easily irritated. At its most severe, folks can feel suicidal and express thoughts that they don't want to be alive. Anytime that those thoughts show up, I imagine you all know this, important to take that seriously. Whether it's somebody that you feel like sometimes may say extreme things or dramatic things, if somebody says anything about not wanting to be alive, it's important to let them know you've heard them and that you take it seriously, and that you know what those resources are. Again, we'll get to some of those practical tips a bit later. And trauma. So Just want to say much of what we're going to talk about, we're encapsulating, in this smaller bits of information. If any of you want more information, for instance, regarding trauma, because it is such a complex concept, please let us know, let Kate know. We're happy to send you some information. So trauma is an experience that is so overwhelming that it stresses out not only our mind, but our body. Historically, trauma has resulted in what was identified back as a war term thing as called PTSD, which is a form of anxiety. You can see some of the symptoms and signs of PTSD. Again, it is a form of anxiety. So in addition to some of the signs students may have about anxiety, will be layered on perhaps flashbacks, nightmares, startle response, avoidance of situations that may be related to what they went through, withdrawing from others, and so forth. So you'll see we've listed here some sources of trauma. There can be many sources of trauma. People talk about the fact that what we've all gone through collectively, and again, disproportionately for some communities, what we're living through now is traumatic. So keep in mind that, again, not everyone is open about this. So it may show up in quieter ways. Alex.
So we wanted to also take a moment to talk with you about disordered eating, because eating disorders are very serious, but treatable mental and physical illnesses. And they affect people of all ages, right? Races, orientations, ethnicities. Eating disorders don't discriminate. They are prevalent in all populations of people. And we're, again, just to remind you that we're not asking you to diagnose or even directly address a concern that you might have about a student's eating disorder, but rather be aware that this is something that is certainly happening in the population of student athletes that you work with. And so I also want to share with you that the National Eating Disorder Association, NEDA for short, which is a great resource. Actually, I would highly recommend if you feel like it would be helpful for you to learn more about this topic, their website and their resources are very accessible. They published some data, some research, and one of the reports that they reported on was a study of Division I NCAA athletes. And so this report revealed that over 1/3 of female athletes reported attitudes and symptoms putting them at risk of at least one type of eating disorder. And I think it's important to say that although most athletes that we know of that have eating disorders, right, the research shows that most of these athletes are female, males are also highly at risk, especially when they're involved in sports that emphasize weight, size, diet, etc. And so some things to think about, some of the common signs that an eating disorder might be prevalent or getting out of control would be obsessions with food, weight, body shape, shame regarding eating or body image, a distorted body image, right? So when an individual has distorted thinking about what they look like and their thinking and the reality really not matching up in a way that's very concerning. And then also prioritizing eating or not eating over other activities or relationships. So these are, by no means the only signs that there is a concern, but these are some of the bigger ones to be aware of. And again, I would invite you to look at the research on this, especially as it relates to student athletes. And it's something that we might get to in our second time with all of you in more detail. And then we touched on this already. Lisa spoke about substance use and student athletes. And we really feel like it's important to bring this up because of all the reasons Lisa mentioned, and because as coaches, and those of you working with student athletes, you may be the first ones to notice that there's a problem, right? You're going to notice if there's a behavior change, and that possibly that change or that challenge that a student athlete is having is due to substance misuse, drinking, drug use. So you may be the first ones to notice something. So it's important to be thinking about this as something that is a common challenge for many people, not excluding student athletes. And the other piece to this that we feel like is so important to bring up is that there's so much stigma, as we've mentioned, around mental health. And we hope that that is something that's going to continue to change now that the conversation is a little more out in the open. And there's a lot of stigma around alcohol use and substance use. And so it's important to think about, or at least consider thinking about, alcohol misuse and drug use as an attempt that one is making to cope with stress. It is most often something that someone does to anesthetize themselves, right? To self-medicate. And almost always there's almost always some underlying mental health concern, right? That's being masked and usually exacerbated when substances are being used. So it's something to really be aware of, and to know that most people are using substances, misusing them in order to cope with some significant challenges that they're having. Lisa, do you want to add anything?
But yeah, it's very complicated, the interaction between mental health and alcohol misuse. I think what's also confusing is there's some folks that can drink very socially, college students and adults, and others that can't have a drink without going on a binge. So we know that there are a lot of underlying biochemical factors that impact that. One of the things I often think about too is that many times adults, but specifically certainly older adolescents and college students and parents of older adolescents and college students are very opposed to the idea of taking medication for mental health issues. And sometimes it can feel confusing because they're saying, well, I'm worried they'll become addicted. I'm worried that if they're drinking too much or smoking a lot of pot, they're going to misuse substances. The reality is when folks are properly prescribed medication and taking them responsibly and as prescribed, it can actually mitigate and decrease abuse of substances. I'm not a prescriber. Alex is not a prescriber. So this is not in any way to kind of toot the horn for people getting prescription medication. It's really more about clarifying that confusion because it's certainly a question I get asked a lot. And one of the things we know is one of the biggest underlying mental health issues that can drive binge drinking is anxiety, an undiagnosed anxiety disorder, specifically social anxiety. So something to keep in mind, as coaches, you have a big influence. So if somebody's going for a medication evaluation, simply saying, hey, you're going to a professional, let's see what they say. Your opinion matters a lot in all of this. So Alex, I know you were going to talk a bit about how therapy there's some good news in that therapy, even short-term therapy, can make a difference.
Yes. Just as you said, the good news is that when people seek treatment for mental health issues, it can make a huge difference in their lives and in the lives of those around them, right? Individuals experience relief in a short amount of time. They can experience relief in a short amount of time. And of course, the severity and the type of mental health issue that they're dealing with will certainly impact the length and type of treatment, right? So counseling can be shorter term, it can be periodic or as needed. Then of course, depending on what the issue is, it can be longer term. And there are so many different modalities that can be used. I mean, we could spend another 3 hours just talking about all the different types of treatment that there are for these issues that we're bringing up. And some of you may be aware of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, as it's often referred to. This is a very well-known treatment for anxiety and trauma and depression. But again, the good news in all of this is that yes, these issues exist, and there's a lot of help out there that can make a big difference.
So we would love to hear from you now in terms of what you've noticed. I know, Alex, you've definitely done a lot of work in the last couple of years with student athletes and with coaches. We'd love to hear from all of you in your role. What have you noticed? Please put your put your answers in the chat. There may be topics we haven't addressed, or maybe you've had experience with some of what we have addressed.
So as you're typing away, maybe I could share some of the things that I've seen. Would that be helpful?
Absolutely.
So in the last year, the work I've done with student athletes, so many trends, so many things that have happened. I think one that really stands out is the impact of losing the rituals and routines that go along with being a student and an athlete, right? And this shift away from campus, away from being physically in a community, and having to really think on your own as a student athlete, how do I structure my time? How do I organize myself? And I have found in my work this year that that's been one of the biggest stressors. And having, clients talk to me about student athletes talking to me about just this feeling like they're sort of lost, and how the rituals and routines of being a student athlete really grounded them, and now having to figure it out on their own, what feels like on their own. But that's been a big trend that I've seen, is not only adjusting to remote learning or hybrid learning, adjusting to not being connected physically with peers, but sort of losing the structure altogether. It's been a major challenge. Yeah. And as a result, students I've worked with have felt unmotivated to do schoolwork, to work out, to really even stay connected, because they have lacked that structure to their day.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious, Kate, any comments or thoughts?
Yeah, we have one in here that says, I've noticed the loss of athletic identity when seasons are canceled, and how students are grappling with that.
Yeah, that we hear a lot about, and I think because the student identity can be so, the athletic identity can be so central for student athletes, that loss is significant. It's also the loss of those peer relationships. Alex and I were talking earlier about when you're practicing from home and virtually kind of doing it on your own is very different than practicing with your team. The other piece around student athlete identity is, on campus, there's such a great deal of respect oftentimes for student athletes that I think when that piece of identity isn't there, students may struggle with, well, what else, who else am I? Who else am I apart from that? It could be an opportunity for folks to dig into, students to dig into other aspects of who they are. I do think it's significant and important to support that and encourage conversations around that when you're hearing that from a student. I'm
going to actually unmute Tiffany, who's raised her hand, and have her respond.
Oh, great.
Yeah. All right, Tiffany.
Hi, Tiffany.
Hi. Yeah, I just want to say thanks so much for doing this. It is a lot of helpful information. And actually on the athletic identity piece, for my master's right now, I'm doing research on that specifically, of how student athletes were, how their identity was impacted by COVID, and maybe their seasons being canceled, and their athletic careers ending a lot sooner than they had thought, and just the general life satisfaction, their general routines that they go through every day, and then them identifying so strongly with being an athlete, and then that kind of being taken away from them soon. So I guess I'll give you guys an update when that research comes back. But also I actually did undergraduate research as well in substance abuse with like alcohol. And it was actually the perception of student athletes, drinking habits. And then what we actually found was a lot more than what we had perceived. So I guess just to kind of put that out there, and that, what we did perceive about student athletes' drinking habits, it actually ended up being more, that they were drinking at more alarming rates than we had perceived in the first place. So
is that during COVID, Tiffany? Is that during or even prior?
COVID. Yeah, so that was even prior. Yeah. So I can't even imagine what that looks like now.
Yeah.
I would share that.
Would love to hear more about all of that, Tiffany. Thank you for that. Yeah. Thank you for doing that research. That is such needed research, I think. I often also wonder for freshmen and sophomores, if they start to wonder about their choice of college or academic institution, because there's such a emphasis on being recruited, and that's such a part of their identity. So B, I would love to hear more about that. Thank you for that.
Lisa, Alex, I think one last thought here on this is, which is interesting, talking about building resilience, is like the notice of fatigue and exhaustion from having to be so resilient, which is an interesting sort of
yes,
changes in the
yes,
environment, like are just constant and so heavy that like there's
yes,
exhaustion from having to be that way.
right, right.
Absolutely. It feels it in, for lack of a better word, the hits keep coming, right? It feels like there's one obstacle sort of in front of the other, and it is exhausting. Absolutely. And I don't think we can ignore either that so much of the connection that people are having with each other is virtual, and that is exhausting on a whole other level, right?
Yeah.
It's a good point.
And it's that kind of waiting till, okay, I'm going to wait another month and I'll be strong for another month. And then it goes on. So that's an excellent observation and thought. Thank you all for that. And if you continue to have thoughts as we move along, we're going to have another spot for some questions as well. So please continue to think about them, put them in the chat. Let's see if I can get back to my, here we go. So talking a little bit about how do you actually bring psychological safety to your team, to your campus, to your department? How can you contribute to that? So having a psychologically safe environment really begins with leadership, although it needs to be maintained from everyone. So trust is central to that. However, there's got to be transparency, there's got to be open communication. So what that looks like in an athletic department as a whole, for how you're talking about it, how you're working with students, how you're indicating concern for students may feel different than a coach, and how you're relating to your team. The similarities are very clear communication, frequent communication, particularly during times like COVID, when they've done studies with the companies, organizations that are really thriving during COVID, or at least surviving and doing okay. A big common factor is the top leadership is having very clear communication with their employees. And so think of it the same with your teams, with your department, whatever your contribution is, that you're communicating clearly, that you're being genuine, that you're being transparent. And sometimes the transparent, genuine answer is, I'm not really sure. I'm kind of in the same boat as you. I'm not really sure. I will, though, find out and let you know as soon as the information becomes available and share it with you. Even that can be very holding. Even having some, whatever your team meeting might be, I'll say that I'll share my daughter is in first year of college and on track and cross country. And even over the summer and the spring, when there was nothing happening, the coach was having regular monthly meetings covering the big topics. And that was incredibly holding for her, even if it was virtual. So anything that you can do in terms of talking about mental health, even weaving that in to your into your meetings and your communications, it can be a little inspirational note. It can be I'm here. I know this is hard on all of us. Reach out if you need to. It's that reminder. And really very much, as Alex said earlier, it's about being open to feedback, that feedback is welcome, that it's a two-way street, that the coach is not only giving feedback, you as an administrator or staff members not only giving feedback to others, perhaps others that report to you, but you're also open to getting feedback from them. That's a huge part of this. We know that life is often a hierarchy and often needs to be a hierarchy, but that does not mean that we can't learn from one another. Again, emphasizing that trust is absolutely central to a psychologically safe environment. And you can't carry all of that responsibility for trust. Absolutely, you can model it, you can lay the foundation for it. Everyone needs to participate. So if there is someone on your team, whether it's your athletic team, your team and admin, if there's someone that you feel is undercutting that or is in some way damaging the trustful nature of the group, of the community, really important to address that. And again, can be done privately in a way that is not shaming, but inviting them to participate in a productive way, letting them know that they're important, that you've noticed sometimes that their input may not have the effect maybe they want them to have. It may be upsetting. It may feel negative. And how can that evolve to something different? So really important pieces. So Alex.
Yes. So how do you recognize when a student athlete is struggling? There are a number of things listed here on this slide that could be signs that one of your student athletes is not doing well. So for example, you may notice a decline in their academic or athletic performance. You may notice that they seem distracted, they're having trouble concentrating. They may also seem, as someone mentioned earlier, exhausted, right? In a lot of fatigue, maybe some sleep problems, and a drastic change in their eating habits as well. The real takeaway from this point that we want you to walk away with is that it's not necessarily about any number one of these things, but we want you to notice what is different about your student athlete, right? So people are different. They have their ways of communicating, and some folks have higher energy and some have lower energy, right? And so you want to think about what are the signs that indicate the athlete is struggling in terms of how different is it from their typical behaviors, their baseline, right? Their demeanor, the way that they usually are, the way that you experience them. So really thinking about how is what you're seeing different from what's typical, and that really being the sign that there may be something going on for them that needs addressing.
And so, oh, sorry, Alex, did I interrupt you?
Oh, no, go ahead. That's okay.
So when you notice that, as Alex is saying, when you notice a change, or when you notice fatigue, or when you notice tearfulness, or any of those signs, what do you do about it? So we often emphasize it's not necessarily what you say. Yes, what you say matters. It's also how you say it. So safe language is incredibly important, which means respectful, non-stigmatizing. So not using language like, you seem a little crazy today, or, a teammate saying she's always kind of psycho. Those are not okay terms to use because they tend to shut people down, because they are stigmatizing. So certainly the safe language matters. Being empathic. So even if you have not experienced what somebody else is experiencing, try to put yourself in their shoes, even for a few seconds. That's really where the empathy comes from, trying to join in their experience. Be genuine, use your own words. There are no perfect words. We all stumble over our words all the time. And that's okay. It's really showing that you care, that you're concerned. Very straightforward way, if you're not sure how to begin those conversations, is an acronym that we use that our youth suicide prevention program in middle and high schools use, is ACT. And this is for students to learn how to recognize signs in one another and themselves of depression or a risk for suicide. And this is also an acronym that we encourage teachers, parents to use to check in with their kids. So very straightforward. Acknowledge what you're seeing. You seem tired. I can tell, you're such a valuable member to the team, so forth. And I can just tell you just kind of haven't seemed to be here. You haven't seemed to be present. Describe what you're seeing. And by doing that, letting them know that you care. I'm here for you. Just want to let you know, anything you need, I'm open for you to talk to. Anytime you want to talk, I'm here. It's important in the acknowledge piece to not get into anything as Alex and I are emphasizing that feels like, well, are you depressed, or you seem anxious, rather to stay with descriptive terms of what you're noticing in terms of their behaviors. You seem sleepy, you seem tired, you seem distracted, because people can often get defensive. I think all of us can get defensive if it feels like someone is trying to make assumptions about what that means. Try to stay with what you're experiencing and keeping that door open to the conversation, to the talking. Alex is going to talk a little bit about a framework that's useful for your team as well as for yourselves.
Yeah, so these are guiding principles for us at Mindwise and Riverside Community Care, and I use these in my own practice with individuals as well as with my staff, because they're guiding principles that allow for what we've been talking about this hour: a psychologically safe community, a trauma-informed community. And so, like Lisa said, we want you to think about these principles in terms of yourselves and your families and your communities, as well as your student athletes, and how to support them in developing safe and supportive communities, especially during this unusual time. So safety being the first guiding principle. When we say safety, we mean physical safety and emotional safety. And part of ensuring that there's safety means reducing sources of toxic stress, practicing self-care for internal and emotional safety, and fostering the positive social connections. As Lisa said earlier in an example, that coaches and administrators who are reaching out, even when there's a lull in what's happening for that sport in that athletic department, it builds in safety and fosters those positive social connections that are so important for resilience. Second would be predictability. There's been a whole lot of unpredictability this year, and as humans, we need to know what's happening to a certain extent, right? To feel safe, to feel in control. And so predictability means building in structure. It means having rituals and routines in your life and supporting rituals and routines in the lives of student athletes. It's about maintaining a schedule and being more organized. And this year we've really had to rethink, how do we organize ourselves, and how do we build in structure to our lives? And we need that as people. It helps us feel grounded. It helps us feel safe. And when we know what to predict, we feel better overall. And then there's control. This has been a time, of course, as you know, where so much has been outside of our control. And it can be very tempting to focus on the negative, right? It can feel like an attractive option to just go down the rabbit hole and think about all the things that are not working and are not good right now. But making an effort to think about the things that you do have control over can make a profound difference. And that means giving yourself choices. It means giving your student athletes choices. And it means collaborating when it comes to decision making. I think this is a place where psychological safety overlaps with these concepts, because by opening yourself up to feedback from student athletes and from the community, you're not only building psychological safety, but you're collaborating and giving control to others in the community. And that feels good when you have a say, when you have control over what's happening. And then, of course, focusing on what's working, focusing on you, focusing on your family's strengths. Anything to add, Lisa?
No, I think that we can also send kind of a one-pager on SPC and how to use it on your day-to-day lives for yourselves, as well as at work for your teams, employees, your groups. So we can send that. Just in the interest of time, want to kind of move on a little bit to some practical tips and then have some time for questions. So, so Alex, you wanted to review a bit about knowing the resources and how to really know what is available to your student athletes.
Yep, exactly. So know the mental health referral protocol at your college, right? Be aware of the specialized mental health resources that are available for student athletes on campus and within the community outside of campus. And one real key thing that we want to convey to you all is that you don't have to do it alone. You should collaborate with each other, with the athletic department leadership, and with counseling services to address the concerns that you have, right? It really does take a village to support students. And so don't take it on yourself, right? Reach out to your leadership and to the counseling services. That's what they're there for. And work together to help your students with what it is that you think that they need to address their concerns. And then, of course, to hold personal boundaries for yourself, for your student athletes. It just means knowing what your limits are, what you can and what you can't do, and supporting the connection to outside resources when there is a significant mental health concern.
And knowing those resources is so, so key. And I imagine all of you already know that and already know the resources available to your students. Having them accessible is huge. So another question for all of you, we welcome your thoughts and questions. What do you identify as primary challenges, and what would be most helpful to you in your role in terms of information about mental health or behavioral health? This actually will be very useful for us. We have a poll question after this as well to inform our second conversation with you, because we want to ensure that we're bringing information to you that will be helpful for your own well-being as well as supporting your students.
I don't have anything yet in the chat, but I
Okay.
some prompts, and maybe in the interim, we can launch the poll.
Sure. Great minds, Kate. I was just thinking that.
Okay, I'll do it now.
Perfect.
Thank you. Yes. So before we go, what information would be most useful for our next session together on April 6th? Learning self-care techniques that you can actually use, better understanding what resilience means, how to balance job and life demands, or all of the above. We really value your input here because we would like to address the things that you feel like you need to learn more about in our next time together.
Yep. So no surprise that balancing job and life is far ahead of the pack here. That is an ongoing challenge for all of us, and particularly with, I think, the pressures you must be feeling in college athletics these days. Yeah. Okay. Hey, well, the good news is we don't have to talk a lot more about resilience. Good for you.
We do. I don't know if I know we're right at the end, but we have two questions actually.
Oh yeah, please. Yeah.
We can roll them over if it makes sense. But the first one is, could you give a few sample questions for starting an initial conversation with a student athlete using safe language?
That's a great question. I would start with, of course, say, hey, can I talk to you a couple minutes? How are you doing? I have noticed that. And start with something that feels a bit more innocuous. So, hey, how are you doing? I've noticed that you've kind of been late to meetings recently. That's not like you. Or I've noticed you've seemed tired. Here for you anytime. So just want to check in with you. Those kinds of openers. And also any language or any conversations to start with I. Mm-hmm. I am here. I notice. I wanted to check in. Whenever I think any of us hear the you seem this or you seem that, even if it's said in a caring way and the intention is good, we can feel on the defensive, particularly when there's a power differential. And if you are in a position of an admin or a coach with students, there's already a power differential. So they may feel that they're already in trouble. Mm-hmm. So the beginning with the I can be really useful. Alex, other suggestions?
The only thing I would add to that is sometimes because of that power dynamic, it can feel like a lot of pressure to respond in the moment, right? So I think sometimes it's not necessarily about asking a question or making an observation as much as it is saying, this has been a really tough year. And if there's ever anything that you feel like I can help with or you want to talk through, I'm here for you. Yeah. We can talk about that. So it's a matter of, it's leaving the door open, but not putting that pressure on the person to respond if they don't want to.
And then checking it again, kind of keeping that, they may not be ready to talk about the first time you ask, you can check in with them another time. I also think that if you have a relationship with your team and it's part of who you are, humor, of course, appropriate, gentle humor, but if that's part of who you are, sometimes a little humor can go a long way. Something like, hey, listen, I'm going to keep asking you how you are. So, hope that's okay. Something like that that indicates authenticity, caring, but also lightens the mood a little bit.
I love that idea. Okay, well, I know we're at 101, so I want to be mindful of time.
Yes.
We do have one more question, and I'll just state it aloud, and then we can maybe incorporate it into part two, which is, I feel like stigma is a huge barrier to students. How can we make it more commonplace to talk within athletics to talk about this? So we can address some stigma maybe on April 6th.
Oh my goodness. I hope whoever asked that comes back on April 6th, because we're going to have a section on that. So thank you for that question. It's a perfect lead in. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just dropped the link to register for part two to be back again on Tuesday, April 6th at 12 p.m. with Alex and Lisa, and dig in on more topics like these and many more. And we'll focus largely on self-care in that. And it sounds like that was right on with the responses in that last poll about balance. So yeah, I mean, Alex, Lisa, anything to say to close it out besides thank you to the two of you and everyone for being here and sticking with us. It's been incredible.
Only thanks to all of you. Thanks for your input. I know many times people have thoughts that don't get put in the chat. So bring your questions next time. And Tiffany, look forward to hearing the outcome of your research.
Awesome.
Thank
Have
you
a great
so much,
day,
everyone.
Thanks for being here. Talk soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, Kate.